Hello, and welcome to the Transforming Loneliness interview series. I'm Laura Parker, the creator and host of the series. Transforming Loneliness approaches loneliness with fresh and unexpected ways of seeing and responding that cultivate connection, belonging, and love. Today, it is my very great honor and pleasure to be with Edl Stein, who is also known by her maiden name, Jan Edl. Edl Stein, MFT, is a licensed psychotherapist in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area and also directs Holos Institute, an educational and counseling center. In addition to leading workshops and retreats, Jan has developed an Ecopsychology Certificate program and curates an annual Ecopsychology conference. Jan's 30-plus year therapy practice utilizes a depth somatic approach, active imagination, EMDR, brain spotting, shamanic journeying, and nature therapy. Jan is a leader and an innovator in the field of ecopsychology. What I love about Jan is the way she combines the visionary and the practical in grounded, useful ways that celebrate and serve human reciprocity with all of life. Welcome, Jan, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Same here. So Jan, just to get started, could you tell us a little bit about what ecopsychology is?
Sure, because it's maybe not so well known because it's relatively new field. It's a field of psychology that is fundamentally trying to shift the way we look at humans, the human situation, from an egocentric viewpoint to an ecocentric viewpoint. So it's a very systemic way of finding our place in the world and our place in relationship to everything in the world. It also acknowledges that everything is alive, that everything is sacred. And it's really based on deep relationships with all beings. So a subset of ecopsychology, and it's not all of ecopsychology, and I think people often confuse it with this, is ecotherapy, which is nature-based work or using nature as the co-therapist or the healer, which is really powerful, but it's not all of what ecopsychology is about. So in ecopsychology, we're considering, in clinical work, we're considering how someone might be influenced by the environment they grew up in, the environment that they're in now. We're always curious about how they're relating to that environment. And we may do ecotherapy, but we may not. We may just keep that sense of how can we help that person cultivate relationships with the world around them as in the forefront. And it also includes helping people process and transform whatever anxiety and grief they might have about what's going on in the world, specifically climate change grief. So we're trying to help transform that grief into a sense of agency and hope.
Sounds so important, and as someone who works from an eco-psychological lens myself, I have a deep appreciation for what you're talking about. And also, I am an indoor ecotherapist or an eco-psychologist, so I know what you're talking about, the difference between ecotherapy and eco-psychology. And actually, a few things that you said I wanted to highlight. One was when you said that ecopsychology sees everything as alive and sacred. And this sounds like it's really bringing in a very ancient way of seeing the world.
Absolutely. I think that our original psyche was one that was really embedded in the world and in a very active relationship with everything around us. And I think people who live maybe closer to nature probably experience that. But unfortunately, our modern lives, our technology has more and more separated us from the world around us, and also created an attitude of, we're at the top of the heap, we're somehow different, we're somehow separate from uh, everything else.
Yes, and therefore the world exists to serve us in some way, and that we're entitled to just take,
Right, right.
which
So
is,
on the topic of loneliness, I think that as I was, contemplating our meeting today, I think that loneliness is an artifact of the suffering that has arisen out of our separation in the world. So people who feel lonely, I mean, it's one thing to be alone and comfortable in that as a human, but it's another thing to feel the pain of being loneliness and feeling, really, I think that's a pain of separation. So the eco-psychological or the ecotherapy approach to working with that or healing that would probably be to open up someone into the connections that really are all around them, that are available in every moment.
yes. So it sounds like from your perspective that eco-psychology would see that loneliness has its roots in a fundamental feeling of separation and unbelonging, and that also then eco-psychology has a lot of practices to offer people that can kind of reconnect, uh, or recreate that sense of relatedness.
Right. Well, yeah, and there's practices, and then also just values that one can cultivate, or a sense of place in the world that might arise simply by finding oneself in relation to the cycle of life or the cycle of the year, for example. I'll give you an example. This time of the year, we're recording this very close to the winter solstice, which is typically a very painful, dark time for a lot of people. But if you can support someone in feeling the beauty of how nature just kind of pulls in and closes during the winter solstice, at least in the northern hemisphere where we live, and that there's something beautiful in that darkness. Maybe maybe it's helpful to go look at the leaves that are starting to go back into the earth, that are starting to decompose, and to see the beauty in that, and then realize that there's coming out of that, there's the increase of the light that will soon be here, and new life sprouting up. And there's that sense of there's a cycle within a year, the solar cycle, there's a cycle within a lunar cycle, the changes in life and the changes within ourselves that we can start to align with. And just the cycle of a whole lifetime that can be expressed through the seasons of a person's life. And we can see that reflected in the seasons of other beings, of the trees or plants or other animals. And what that cultivates is, over time, is a real sense of belonging.
Hmm. Right. We see ourselves as part of these cycles and seasons. And I can see how, even as you're describing the cycles and seasons, like, for example, at this time of year when nature is pulling in, and that, but what's happening in our culture at this time of year is this kind of crazy consumerism and lots of parties, lots of celebrating, and that can feel at odds with the natural cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unless they can be paired, that sense of celebration is paired with nature. That it's an acknowledgement. It's marking a point in the cycle of a year. And then we kind of move into ritual and the value of having ritual. It's fine to get together and have a celebration with other human beings. If you can connect it to the natural world, you've created a ritual that is beyond the human experience. It's in the archetypal realm, and it has a lot more meaning, even if we don't articulate it fully. It's a felt sense of meaning, and that then engenders a sense of belonging, which addresses loneliness.
Yes, it does. And I'm just thinking, reflecting on how so few rituals that are offered at this time of year or celebrations have that element of bringing us into connection and remembering our embeddedness in the season, and how when we do that, how meaningful it is, how it can bring meaning and, as you said, belonging back into our celebrations with other humans. And also just even that word ritual, it again reminds me of what you were talking about before, this very ancient way of being in relationship with the earth. That ritual, that is something that used to be part of how humans lived, so much more than it is now.
Yeah. And all of the rituals of ancient times really arose out of a very direct relationship with the natural world.
That's right. So it was all about participating, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And
Even the
that's
mythologies that arose were a way of kind of metabolizing what was happening in the natural world in powerful ways.
Yes. So, and on losing all of that or having it atrophy is all seems to be part of loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, obviously you're studying this greatly and looking at a very broad spectrum of responses to loneliness and how to work with that. The eco-psychology lens would be one of bringing someone into a participation with the world in a deeper way. It doesn't necessarily mean connecting them with more human beings, although what will happen naturally will be greater connection with human beings. So one of the things that I feel strongly about is not just using nature to heal and heal a sense of separateness, but to engender a sense of reciprocity. So as we get deeper and deeper in relationship and in care and feel connected to the natural world, what should arise is a sense of belonging and wanting to protect that belonging, protect that relationship.
Mm. Yes, and I can see how that would benefit our relationships with other humans. That if we're valuing relatedness and care and protection, we'll see other humans as part of the whole cycle of life too.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, yeah. So I know that you have a presentation that you'd like to share with us of some practices that you've developed that can support this connection. So,
Sure. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I teach a lot about, little ways that we can help support people form a deeper connection to nature beyond just, oh, that's a really great tree. Oh, that's a fun looking boulder. I love the way this landscape looks, but a way that feels more personal. And I actually came up with, kind of sifted it down to 12 practices. And today I've edited it a bit, so I'd like to just share 9 of them. But on my website, you can go there and actually download a sheet that has all 12 of them. But shall I begin that?
sure, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Give me a minute here to get this set up. And here we go. And we'll start playing that. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, these are practices to deepen your connection to nature. And I've added that discover how the inner and the outer landscape reflect each other. And I think that the best we can do in an ecotherapy experience is to help people discover that the images, the sensations, the patterns that we have floating around inside of us are all out there in the natural world, and we can discover them. And when there's a magic that happens when we see that reflected back to us in the natural world of, oh, this isn't just me, this is something that's greater in the world. And it's a felt reaction. It's kind of hard to give it words, but it can be really potent. So the first one is just to set an intention, and to, before you go out on an excursion in nature, to just take a moment and to think, what do I want to get out of this? Perhaps there's an issue that you're resolving in your life, or you want to understand something more deeply, or you just simply want to offer something to yourself. You can construct an altar. You can lay down a stone or some other object, or inwardly or outwardly speak your intention. It shifts the awareness to a more sacred approach to the natural world. And here's an image of a group that at a residential retreat I was offering, where they're getting ready to go out and have a solo day in nature on a spot that's become very special to them on this particular landscape. Another one is to be aware of thresholds or portals. So this is a little bit of a device to play with your mind. And I want to emphasize here that connecting with our imagination is really, really important part of healing. Any issue in our psyches, but particularly loneliness. And our culture has really dampened our imagination. So here's one little trick. If you go out in nature, pay attention to portals or openings, and use them in your mind as an invitation, almost like a doorway. Here's a friend who's opening a door to their home. I'm going to step through it. I'm going to get deeper and deeper into my connection with this place. It could be anything you could make out of that. We see these shapes and portals all the time in nature. And to be curious, what's on the other side? Crossing over a river or a creek is also, we're stepping over a threshold and going deeper into the place, stepping between trees. Don't forget the vertical dimension as well. And then there's practicing a soft gaze or focused, and you find a place out in nature that feels really good to you, and to just sit for a while, close your eyes for a moment, and when you open your eyes, allow your eyes to be unfocused. Welcome the impressions of color and shape without defining what the form is. These are just some images. My friend Tony Siciliano took some of these photos. Most of them are mine, but you can see there's a different way of looking at these landscapes where you're just taking in color and gesture. And there's a feeling tone that then can arise. Another thing is to focus on the contours of a land, looking for the places where maybe a forest area meets a meadow, and the richness of those lines. Or the place where the horizon meets the earth. And that point on the horizon, a Navajo medicine man once told me that his people considered that the point of deep creation. So resting your awareness on that point can open up something in your own psyche. And then there's listening. So to go to a place, sit, close your eyes, and just observe, what do you hear? Notice what's distant, what seems close, what's the loudest sound you hear, what's the softest sound you hear, and see what happens with that one. And then, of course, just play. Let your body mirror a gesture that you might find in nature. And go ahead and mimic it. Don't be afraid to move. Let the wind sculpt you. Stretch. Let the curves in the land inspire you. See what you feel as you look at different gestures in nature. There's a friend letting the wind, his own breath, meet in a really creative way. Then relate. Give yourself permission to have a conversation with the beings that you find in nature. Now, these don't have to necessarily be the four-legged or the winged ones. It could be a rock. It could be anything. But sit down and let yourself actually have a conversation with someone you see out there, and notice and know that as much as you are perceiving that being, they're perceiving you. It's a two-way street. And this is a wonderful thing I find when I'm feeling a little bit down, to take a little short walk and pay attention to all of the beings I find in nature, and start to notice that how much they're actually noticing me. And it can actually weave you into a connection that's just lovely. Woman going to see some turkeys. And the interesting thing about this, the more you look for these connections, the more you'll find. And then spend some time in the minutia of the small things. So get up close to something that calls your attention and just get lost in it. The details, the color, it's a magnificent world out there that calls our attention and offers itself to us. And a lovely thing to do, and this is kind of more on the side of the ritual, is to create some piece of art. And of course, this is an ancient way, right, of honoring how we are taking in and how the outer landscape is going to be mirrored in our own inner psyches. It can be something very, very simple. It can be something very elaborate, perhaps you build. And there's a beauty about building an art piece in nature out of found objects that you just leave there. Be very simple. And finally, to offer your gratitude to the place. So if you've had a really beautiful, connected experience with a place in nature, speak out loud or in your heart your gratitude for how it's touched you, what it may have taught you, and how you'll carry it with you in your heart as you go. And I would love to end this with a poem, if I may. We still have time.
Oh, definitely. We have plenty of time.
Okay.
In fact, I actually wanted to reflect a few things before we go on to the poem, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah.
Just because what you shared with us is so rich, and I saw so much of how it could be a set of instructions for how to approach loneliness, because loneliness is part of nature. You know, as you've been saying, that what we encounter in life is not just an effect of our own private psyches, but it's part of the world. And so one thing you said that really struck me is that how important imagination is. Yeah. And that it's been dampened by our culture.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add about that?
Oh my goodness, yes. If you think about it, the images we get from media, from advertising, it's all coming at us. It imprints in us, but it's someone else's image. And the more we can cultivate the images that are within us and let them project outward into the natural world, or look for patterns that mirror it in nature, there's a sense that we're actually coming back to life. We're reanimating ourselves. We're re-spiriting ourselves. There's a term you may have heard this before, of being dispirited, and which is another way of, I think it's a more refined way of looking at depression. But it can also, I think, if we're lonely, we might feel dispirited. If you activate something in your psyche, something in your imagination, you start to allow yourself to dream or to daydream or to imagine. And I think connecting with nature, we in that kind of soft gaze, open feeling way, we start to invite our own psyches to dip into our creative unconscious. There's a powerful healing that happens in that. And clinically, that's been shown. I mean, there are many people that have written books about that, and even studies done about working with people who are deeply depressed. If you can get them to start to image and imagine and drop into their creative selves, you see a great reduction in the depression. They come out of it.
Yes, I really see the way that all of those aspects are connected, the way that letting the imagination or the images kind of take root allows a different kind of life to kind of become grow inside of us, aside from kind of the one that's handed to us by the images that we see on television or advertising. So I can see what you're talking about, and that it requires a different kind of relationship with nature to allow those images to grow inside us. Another thing that, anything else? Sorry.
Let me read this poem because it really segues into this.
Perfect. Okay.
Then I can stop doing the screen share. This is a
Okay.
Mary Oliver. I'm sure that many of the listeners have heard this before, but it's always good to hear it again. Mary Oliver, Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for a hundred miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and deep trees, the mountains and rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are headed home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
So beautiful. I can hear that poem again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't find my cursor here to stop the screen share.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
That point on the horizon is another point that I actually wanted to highlight of what you said. You said the point of origin of deep creation, and how contemplating that and actually putting our psyche into that point, how expansive and liberating that can be.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think about it, it's a liminal space. It's a place where sky meets earth, but we can hold that symbolically as two very, very different archetypal energies coming together, and where they meet is a passageway. It's a liminal state. It's not neither here nor there, and it's an opening into something new.
Yes, and as you were saying earlier, the way the outer world mirrors our inner world, how helpful it is to remember that we carry those inside of us, those two energies of the earth and the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and there was one other thing that you said that I wanted to highlight before we finish today, and that was how you mentioned that when you go outside, it's a two-way street. That how powerful it is to really remember that the beings around us are beholding us.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And what an antidote that is to loneliness. Like, we can get so human centric. We can just really see things from the perspective of our own inner world and forget.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I have felt a little disconnected and maybe a little down, and just gone for a walk around the neighborhood, and oh, there's a squirrel running along the fence, and for a split second that squirrel sees me as much as I see her, and there's a big hawk that flies overhead, and it sure sees me, and then all the little birds flitting around, and even the trees start to feel like they're witnessing me, and that sense of, oh, there's this great incredible ecosystem here. I'm just a part of it, but I am a part of it, and it's a wonderful cure for the blues.
Most definitely, and a cure for that sense of isolation and separation. The longing that we all have for that feeling that we belong and that we're part of something greater. So thank you, Jan, for sharing your wisdom and your beautiful slideshow with us today. It's so rich and deep and powerful, these practices. And I just wanted to, before we finish, ask you, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners about what you're offering and how they can find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a website for my practice that I think you're listing with this. It's janedl.com. Like you said earlier, Edl's my main name, so it's just EDL, JANEDL.com. And also the Holos Institute, which is holosinstitute.net website. We have lots of events that we offer, workshops and programs. Some are just half a day, some are a full day, some are a week, to help people have a wonderful nature immersion experience. And we also have a certificate program coming up in the new year. We just completed one in 2018 that was amazing and deeply transformative, I think, for all of us in the program. It's Ecopsychology Certificate, where we're teaching people how to be facilitators for a deeper connection in nature with both individuals and groups, how to work with people who are in grief and anxiety about climate change, and also how to consider how people of other cultures, of other colors, of other socioeconomic backgrounds may have a very different and a very specific perspective on the ecology of their world, and how to be respectful and responsive to that. So, yeah.
Sounds great. So that's available on the Holos
All that
website as well.
well. Mhm.
Okay, well,
And then there's an annual conference too, which always happens in the spring. This year it's in early April, where we bring together all kinds of perspectives. So it's a great community.
thank you so much for your devotion to the bringing eco psychology to the world, Jan. It's so clear through the programs you've created, um, just what the tremendous gift that you're bringing. So thank you for that. And thanks for sharing this interview with me today.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, bye for now.